I am Cormac Hale, 70 years old retired piano tuner, still steady with my hands, though my back complains more than it used to. I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, a town that has grown slicker and richer with every passing decade. I keep to my habits, a pour-over coffee every morning, a notebook filled with neat rows of ink, and a walk down to the harbor when the weather allows. A man can survive on rhythm if he keeps it steady. That rhythm cracked on the evening of my son's wedding rehearsal. The ballroom at Harbor Grove Country Club was lit like a catalog. Glass chandeliers, linens so white they seemed staged in champagne that I was told came from a vineyard in France. Guests smiled at me with the politeness reserved for an older man who is tolerated rather than included. My son Kellen, tall in his fitted suit, leaned in close enough for only me to hear. His voice carried the arrogance of youth and borrowed wealth. "You will not see a single dollar." That was the sentence. No build-up, no attempt at respect, just a dismissal quick as a door slammed. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen glowed with a bank alert. A payment had moved, not scheduled, but moved. $17,800 drawn from an escrow account tied to the wedding. A smaller charge, $350, sat beneath it, labeled as the ballroom hold fee from the previous month. Above them, a balance that mattered far more, $2,700,000, tied to an old limited liability company I had formed, one I still controlled, with 51%. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept my face calm. In the corner of my mind, I pictured my ledger at home, the neat rows of numbers inked with a fountain pen. The figures had always steadied me. Tonight they told me someone was trying to steady themselves with my work. "Do not embarrass yourself," Kellen added, his smile fixed for the photographers. "You are the past." I looked around that ballroom. Guests laughed at small jokes. Glasses clinked. The planner hovered with her clipboard decorated with stickers, her eyes skipping past me. I sat at a table, pushed near the edge alone. They had erased me in plain sight. Then another detail. An email appeared in my inbox. Forwarded accidental perhaps, but there it was. Attached was a scanned codicil, a supposed amendment to my will, bearing a notary stamp from a week prior. Kellen had sent it to the wedding planner as proof of his right to pull funds. Proof built on a forgery. I tightened my grip on the phone. My hand did not shake, though the moment deserved trembling. I remember thinking of the absurdity. A man spends decades tuning strings for others, saving every careful note, and here his own son tries to play him out of tune with a fake signature. The rest of the evening passed in fragments. A toast that did not mention my name. A seat left empty beside me, though the hall was crowded. Smiles from the bride's family, thin and knowing. I drank water and counted each swallow. Here is what matters. Families and money walk together, but they rarely walk straight. One will trip the other if given the chance. If you are watching this, tell me where you are from and subscribe. We need to talk about what blood can do when money is near. Because what they did not know was that I had already set traps of my own. The next evening, the rehearsal dinner carried on with all the polish one expects from old money. I sat beneath portraits of men in navy blazers, the kind who once decided which ships could anchor in the harbor. My jacket felt borrowed from another era. The laughter around me was loud, too loud. Laughter often is when it tries to cover discomfort. Kellen walked the room like he owned it. In a sense, he believed he did. He stopped behind my chair, placed a hand on my shoulder as though in affection, and whispered for me alone. "You are the past. This house, the accounts, the company, all of it will pass through me." His fiancée, E's mother, Romy's mother, stood nearby with a glass of champagne. She smiled soft at the edges and said in a voice meant to sting quietly, "Your credit score, Mr. Hale, is irrelevant now. The future belongs with them." The words landed heavier than the crystal stemware she carried. For decades, I had guarded a house valued at $2,700,000, and I had held 51% of an LLC that represented my life's work. In their eyes, that meant nothing. I did not answer. Silence has its weight. Mine pressed harder than any speech could. A waiter leaned to refill my glass. His hand trembled from the weight of the bottle, and I slipped $9 into his palm. A simple tip, a habit I keep. He thanked me in a whisper, and I noticed Kellen watching. To him, $9 for service was an extravagance. Yet here he was reaching for escrow deposits of $78,000 as if they were his birthright. Later during the dessert course, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not the bank. It was a screenshot slipped anonymously through a message, a group chat among the bridal party. One groomsman had written, "The old man will not know how to swipe an ATM card, let alone stop escrow." Laughter followed, written in emojis, but I read it as clearly as spoken words. I looked across the table at my son. He raised a toast, his glass high, his grin wide. Around him, Romy's family smiled with polite admiration. I sat in silence, surrounded by clinking glassware and the scent of overripe roses. Humiliation does not come as a single blow. It comes in layers. First the whisper, then the smirk, then the confirmation in writing. My name erased not only from their mouths, but from their respect. Still, I kept my calm. I sliced a piece of cake and let the fork rest against porcelain. The noise of the room swelled, again laughter. Too sweet wine poured too freely. They thought the ledger was theirs to edit. They had forgotten who kept the pen. If you were me sitting in that room, laughed at in group chats, dismissed as a relic, what would you have done? I left the club that night without a word. My car was the only modest sedan in a row of imported machines, their hoods gleaming under lamps. The drive home was quiet, the road lined with old stone walls and tall maples. I thought of the years I had tuned pianos in houses larger than my own, listening to families argue over nothing more than tempo while I saved each check in careful stacks. At home, I unlocked my study. The room smelled of ink and cedar. My files rested in cabinets labeled by hand. On the desk sat a ledger rows of numbers in fountain pen, each one a reminder that I had always kept track. Tonight I opened the drawer with deeds, trusts, and the original will. I laid them out flat, smoothed their edges. They were more than paper, they were shields. The first shock came from the Ring camera. I had nearly forgotten to check it. A notification blinked from the night before. I pressed play. The screen showed Kellen at my porch, crouched by the mailbox. He pulled an envelope free, unfolded it, and took a photograph with his phone before sliding it back. That envelope contained proof of a lottery claim, the seed that had grown into the company assets. The footage caught his face in the glow of the porch, light eyes darting greedy. I sat back in my chair. It is one thing to be insulted at a dinner. It is another to see your son stealing in the dark. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another bank alert. This time it was a charge just shy of $3,000, $2,999 to be exact. It was a trick I recognized, a common way to keep withdrawals below reporting thresholds. He was testing boundaries, probing like a thief in training. I printed the Ring still frame, the timestamp clear, his hand frozen mid-theft. I clipped the bank alert to it with a brass fastener, evidence neat and undeniable. Then I checked my email again. There it was, the forwarded codicil. The notary seal looked legitimate at first glance, but I had once spent afternoons with an old lawyer friend learning the basics of authenticity. The seal number rang false. I called the county clerk's office the next morning. The clerk confirmed it within minutes. The stamp did not match their records. Someone had copied an old form, changed dates, and pasted my name. I hung up the phone with a calm that surprised even me. Rage had no place here. Preparation did. That evening I sat with neighbors at the harbor, a casual chat about homeowners association fines and parking tickets. I slipped a question about liens and trust codicils. They laughed, thinking me eccentric, but one of them mentioned a case where a forged quitclaim deed had been struck down. I noted the phrase and tucked it away. Humiliation fades when replaced by clarity. My son thought he had cornered me with noise and spectacle. He forgot I had spent a lifetime working in silence, listening to the fine pitch of strings until they rang true. But what they did not know was that the next move would not be his. The wedding day arrived, dressed in silk and roses. The ballroom shone brighter than it had the night before, with flowers flown in and music swelling from a hired quartet. Guests found their seats, servers balanced trays of champagne and whispered about gratuities. I walked in quietly, wearing the same dark suit I had owned for years. The fabric was worn at the elbows, but it held its dignity better than most men in the room. I took a seat near the back. No one invited me to the head table. From there I could see the stage, the string players, the broad cake under glass. A man learns much by watching unnoticed. The ceremony began. Vows were spoken, applause rehearsed. Then came the pause before the dinner. The master of ceremonies lifted the microphone, preparing to announce the first course. That was when I rose. I walked to the front, slow but steady. Guests turned whispers, spreading faster than music. At my side was a notary summoned quietly that morning. His briefcase looked out of place among lace and lilies. I nodded and he opened it, producing a folder. This, I said, my voice clear, as a codicil to my will. It was forged. And this, I lifted the copy, as the real record filed and notarized. You may compare the seals. Gasps moved across the room. Kellen's face drained of color. Before he could speak, the banquet manager entered from the side door, phone in hand. His eyes found mine. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "your instruction has been received." The escrow payment of $78,000 is on hold. The bank confirmed the freeze this morning. Silence fell. The quartet stopped mid-note. Guests looked from me to Kellen, then to the bride's family. Kellen burst forward. "You cannot do this, not in front of everyone," his voice cracked. "This is my wedding." I let him shout. Then I placed a wire receipt on the lectern. It showed 3 transactions, $350 the hold fee, $17,800 the partial payment, and $2,700,000 the value tied to the account. The figures glowed under the ballroom lights, undeniable. "This is not only your wedding," I said, voice steady. "This is my work, my name, my 51% control, and I will not see it stolen." The notary stamped the true codicil, the sound of metal on paper echoing like a gavel. The bride's family shifted in their chairs. Murmurs rose. The master of ceremonies lowered the microphone, unsure whether to continue. Guests stared at me, some with pity, some with awe. I felt none of their weight. My calm was my weapon. "If your child stood before you stripping your name from your own labor, would you stand silent?" I asked, though I did not need an answer. I stepped back, leaving the papers in full view. The music never resumed. The ballroom did not recover after that freeze. Guests sat with half-raised forks, the scent of beef tenderloin cooling in the air. I remained at the front, steady on my feet, the folder open like a silent judge. Kellen lunged toward me, but Romy's father caught his arm. "Not here," he hissed, though the microphones picked up enough for half the room to hear. I nodded to the notary. He produced another document, a search from the county clerk. "This," I said, holding it high, "is the quitclaim deed my son prepared. He wanted me to sign away the family house. But the registry confirms it has never been recorded. Paper without record is nothing but theater." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests leaned in, whispering about fraud, about signatures that did not match. Then came the next blow. I unfolded a slip stamped by our homeowners association. "Here is a fine," I said, $900 for blocking the fire lane with his rented car. He paid it with company funds, not his own. That is misuse, plain and written. Gasps again. Romy's mother covered her mouth with her napkin. The bride's uncle shook his head. I looked directly at Kellen. "You mocked me for tipping $9 at dinner. Yet you burned nearly $1,000 of company funds on parking violations." He tried to speak, but his throat failed him. From my pocket I drew another sheet, this one a group chat printout. The words were bold and juvenile. "The old man cannot stop Escrow. He still writes with a pen." Laughter in emoji form trailed after. I placed it beside the forged codicil. "This is your handwriting now," I said. Screens and sneers. The bride's family had heard enough. Romy's father rose, whispering to her. She stood veiled, trembling, and walked out of the ballroom. The train of her gown dragged across marble like a surrender flag. Half her family followed. Kellen stumbled after her, but the maitre d' blocked his path with a stiff arm. "Payment is frozen," he said, voice clipped. "Until this is resolved, no service continues." Guests clutched their phones, recording, sharing, sending. The story spread before dessert. I returned to my seat, not at the head table, but in the corner where I had begun. I lifted a glass of water. The taste was flat, but it carried weight. "They thought it ended here," I told the air calm and unbroken. "But probate court has the final word." The ballroom emptied faster than I expected. Some guests slipped out quietly, jackets draped over arms. Others marched with the bride's family faces set like stone. By the time the staff cleared untouched plates, only half the chairs remained filled. The quartet packed their instruments in silence. The air smelled of roses left too long in water. I stayed seated, calm as ever. Kellen stood near the stage, red-faced, pacing like a man cornered by his own shadow. He barked into his phone, begging the bank to release funds, then slammed it down when the answer came back. The same escrow on hold per controlling member. 51% carries weight even when spoken softly. By morning, the story had left the ballroom and entered the street. A clip surfaced on next-door shaky footage from a neighbor who had attended as a guest. The caption read, "Father freezes son's wedding payment live." Comments poured in legendary move. "Protect your assets. That is cold, but deserved." Local papers sniffed it out next. Greenwich father blocks wedding funds amid family feud. The photo showed me walking out of the club coat, buttoned expression unreadable. They called it scandal. I called it Tuesday. At the coffee shop the next morning, whispers followed me. Some praised my composure. Others shook their heads, muttering that family should never fight in public. I tipped my barista the usual $9. She looked me in the eye, smiled, and said quietly, "Good for you." Meanwhile, Kellen's credit score plummeted. His condo purchase fell apart when the escrow froze. Romy's family severed ties. Her father sent a lawyer's letter canceling all commitments. The club invoiced Kellen for breach of contract $17,800 lost with no wedding delivered. On social media, the group chat screenshot leaked. The mocking words the old man still writes with a pen spread like wildfire. Strangers laughed, strangers condemned, strangers took sides. Viral attention is a strange kind of mirror. It shows a man exactly what he is to the crowd. I watched quietly. I did not argue online, did not answer reporters. Silence has a sharper edge than words when used correctly. Over dinner that week, a neighbor asked Cormac was it worth it, to humiliate him in front of everyone. I set down my fork. Worth, I said, is measured in more than dollars. Sometimes it is measured in the quiet you regain. Humiliation once layered on me was now stacked upon him taller, heavier. I did not rejoice, I observed. Funny thing, though. For years, Kellen had mocked me for tipping $9 for saving receipts for scribbling numbers with ink. Yet $3,200,000 in assets nearly slipped through his fingers because he did not respect the ink that kept records true. The irony did not need my voice. It echoed on its own. The probate hearing came 3 weeks later. By then, the town had grown tired of gossip, but the courtroom still filled with curious faces. Reporters lined the benches, notebooks open. Kellen arrived alone. His fiancée had returned the ring. Her family would not answer his calls. He looked older already, as though humiliation had aged him faster than years could. I walked in with a folder under my arm, the same folder that had rested on my desk for decades. Inside were the ledgers, the receipts, the trust documents, and the codicil properly notarized long before this storm. My shoes echoed on the marble floor. I did not need to speak loudly. The paper would speak for me. The judge reviewed the evidence. First, the forged codicil, its seal number confirmed false by the county clerk. Then the quitclaim deed never filed void on its face. Next, the wire receipts showing $350, $17,800, and the estimated $2,700,000 value. Finally, the lien filings and the HOA fine $900 charged to company accounts. Piece by piece, the record built itself. Kellen tried to argue. He claimed I had promised him control, that family obligation outweighed signatures. His voice cracked under the weight of silence in the room. The judge cut him short. Obligation is not ownership, she said, and her gavel struck once sharp. The ruling was clear. All assets remained under my name and authority. The forged codicil was void, the attempted quitclaim null. The LLC stood with me as controlling member, 51% intact. Escrow funds were returned, condo purchase canceled, and damages assigned to Kellen for breach of contract. He left the courtroom with debt instead of inheritance. I did not smile. Revenge, when done right, does not need laughter. It needs finality. That evening, I signed a new trust. Half of the estate earmarked for community music programs, scholarships for children who could not afford instruments. The remainder secured, under conditions that required accountability, 2 signatures for every large withdrawal. I had learned the cost of blind trust. I would not pay it twice. Neighbors congratulated me. Some called me ruthless, others wise. I accepted neither label. I am a man who counted notes and kept them in tune. This was no different. As I left the clerk's office, the autumn air smelled of salt and wood smoke. I thought of my son, once small enough to sit on my lap while I played simple chords. He had grown into a man who thought signatures were playthings and respect was optional. That transformation was his doing, not mine. The revenge was not the freeze, nor the exposure, nor the courtroom. The revenge was the return of balance. The house was quiet when I returned from court. Afternoon light filtered through the blinds, striping the floorboards in gold. I set the folder of documents on the desk where it had always belonged. For decades, I had kept order with ledgers and receipts. Tonight, those same papers had defended me without a raised voice. I poured myself coffee, though the hour was late. Habit matters more than time. The taste was steady, bitter, and honest. I looked at the stack of files one last time before sliding them into the cabinet. They no longer felt like shields. They felt like closure. News traveled fast. The local paper ran a headline the next morning: Judge affirms father's control. Son left with debt. Online, the clip from the wedding continued to circle, now paired with commentary about family greed and the cost of arrogance. Strangers debated my choices as though they had been seated at that ballroom table. I did not read much of it. Noise fades. Neighbors on next door filled the gaps. Some called me strong. Others whispered that blood should forgive blood. I did not answer. Instead, I posted one sentence and locked the thread: I am still a father, but money is responsibility. That was enough. Kellen has not visited since. Perhaps he is ashamed, perhaps angry. He will find his own path or he will not. That is no longer my burden. What I know is this: a man cannot buy respect with escrow funds or stolen signatures. Respect comes from steady work, from honoring what was built before him. I sit now with the same fountain pen, its nib scratching softly on the page. I think about music, about how a single string tuned too tight will snap while one tuned too loose will sag. Balance is the art. Families are no different. Some will say I humiliated my son. Some will say I protected myself. Both may be true. What matters is that the truth is written down, signed and sealed. He erased my name at his wedding. I erased his claim in court, balance restored.